Hello and welcome to episode 61 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. My name is Patrick Stemp, and we've got Michael Ronn here as always, and are joined by someone who's turning out to be kind of a recurring special guest, PT Hylton. How are you guys
Hello.
doing?
Great, Pete. How's it going, Patrick? PT.
Good.
Good.
I'm
How's
like
everyone's?
if this were a sitcom, I'd be like the wacky neighbor who just pops in every once in a while.
Mr. Furley,
Yeah.
always misunderstanding what's going on the podcast.
Yeah.
So tonight we're going to be talking about sequels. And we will start with our usual weekly roundtable about what we've been reading. And why don't we start with Michael? How's your week been?
Pretty good. I actually I finished Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton.
Cool.
Loved it. Fantastic. Probably gonna go on my list of favorite novels. Just master at work. I talked about it last week.
It's been years since I read that, so just refresh my memory. Like how true to the book is the movie? I think it's pretty close, right?
It is pretty close. I mean, it's been years since I've seen the movie. There are a few differences. I think the ending is a little different, and a couple of characters may or may not be in it, or may have slightly less roles in the movie than they do in the book. But yeah, it's pretty close, I would say. It's pretty faithful, which I was surprised. I thought it would be totally different. So, but yeah, I really, really enjoyed that, and definitely going to read The Lost World. So
The sequel.
Yeah, the sequel. And it's interesting because he kind of leaves it open at the end of this one. I mean, you definitely know that there's going to be a sequel, which I don't think at the end of the first Jurassic Park movie, I don't think it was clear that there would be a sequel. But
Well,
anyway,
yeah, I mean, it's not like
it's
they blew
kind of
up
ambiguous.
Yeah,
Yeah, because the movies came out a couple of years apart. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the audiobook by Scott Brick. So I would definitely recommend, if you haven't listened to it or if you're wanting to reread it, check out the audiobook. It was worth it. I also read The Future of the Mind by Michio Kaku, and he is the same guy that wrote The Physics of the Future that I talked about earlier this year, around the beginning of this year that I read. And basically he talks about the brain and all the technology and science that's going on right now to help us unlock more of our brains. So he talks about possibly changing. I don't know. He talks about some weird stuff. I didn't really care for this one, honestly. I like Michio Kaku a lot, but this one, his brand is very pop science, right? He takes very complicated scientific concepts, distills them down into a way that you understand it, but it also expands your mind, right? And I felt like he got way too bogged down in the details. And maybe it's just because I'm just not terribly interested in neuroscience, but I had a hard time following it just from the get-go. It just was tough. Even the audiobook was kind of putting me to sleep. So I would say if you're a Michio Kaku fan, check it out, but I think his other books are a lot better. So
I haven't read anything by him. What would you recommend?
I would recommend Physics of the Future.
Cool.
Was a good one.
Yeah, I've had that one on my list for a while since you talked about it.
There's a lot of different stuff in it, and a lot of it is in our everyday lives, so it's interesting. Whereas when he's talking about brain waves and the different parts of the brain and how they regulate, it just interesting, but not really. I guess I thought it would be different than it was. So not much else to say about that one.
Okay.
I also finished a graphic novel this week, and this is In Real Life by Cory Doctorow and Jen Wang. And I actually found out about this through the last graphic novel I read, Flight. And there was a graphic short story by Jen Wang that I really liked. And so I looked her up, and I found out that she did a book with Cory Doctorow. So I was like, oh, we've mentioned him a couple times on the show, so I'll just go and grab it. And it's basically about a girl who plays a video game online, kind of like World of Warcraft, very similar. And she develops an avatar, and she meets another avatar who's based in China, who's not living the same life that she's living in privileged North America, right? And so she tries to save him. And so it's interesting because it kind of hits those weird undertones that are, it kind of pushes a lot of buttons, but he says in the introduction that it's very economics driven. So it's a big metaphor for what's really going on in the world. Not sure I agree with all the worldviews, but I really enjoyed the story, and I really enjoyed the art. So it was good. I would recommend it. So,
Okay.
And then I'm reading, just real quick, I'm reading Invasion by Johnny Beecher and Sean Platt. Listening to the audiobook. So about a third of the way through that.
And is that like another Ray Chase narrated one, or was that somebody else who does that?
I think this is Ray Porter.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good. I guess it's not as. I mean, it's not The Beam, or it's not their other audiobooks.
So do you mean it's not The Beam story-wise, or like quality of the narration?
It's not that I don't like the narrator. I think he's the right narrator for the story. I just think I like Ray Chase a lot better, I guess I would say. He really does a good job with the main character, though. I mean, it's awesome. But I don't know. I guess I'm used to kind of the multicast audiobooks now. I kind of like that. So
let me ask you this then, because how does he handle the female characters? So there's quite a few. There's the
there are. There's the ex-wife, the wife.
There's his ex-wife, daughter. So how does he how does he narrate those characters? Because I know we talked a while ago about a problem I have with an audiobook that I was starting to listen to that I still haven't gone back to, where the gravelly voiced male narrator really kind of took it over the top with the female characters, and it just pushed me away. So how does he just kind of read the words? Is there an affectation there?
There's an affectation. And the females do kind of sound pouty, I mean,
they are kind of pouty, but
they are very pouty, but it's not
in the book. I'm not.
But it's not terrible. Yeah, in the book, we're not making blanket statements here.
I just like to say I don't agree with anything that's been said.
Next time you see me, talking about the book here, but it's good though. It's not the best Sterling and Stone audiobook, but it's not bad.
Okay.
That's my week.
That's your list? Okay. PT, how about you? What have you been reading lately?
I'm reading The Phantom Tollbooth, which I've never read before. My daughter just read it, and she liked it a lot, and she said, "Dad, you'd like this," and that's the first time she's ever recommended a book to me, so I thought I'd give it a try, and I'm enjoying it so far.
No, that title rings a bell, but I can't remember who wrote it.
Yeah, it's Norton Juster. He's
okay.
It's the kid.
I don't know why that rings a bell.
Yeah, it's very familiar, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, it's like this kid gets this box, and it's this toll booth he assembles, and then when he walks through or drives through in his little toy car, the toll booth, he's like in this other world. So it's kind of like a Alice in Wonderland kind of type thing, where it's like he's a portal fantasy, he's in this other world. And I haven't figured out yet if the author's trying to say anything, like if there's some political undertone to it, or if it's just being really silly, but I'm enjoying it nonetheless. And then I'm listening to the audiobook of The Power of the Dog by Don Winslow, which is a book about about like Mexican drug cartels. It's a novel about it's compared a lot to like The Godfather, kind of what The Godfather is for mob stories. This kind of is for drug cartel stories, and you kind of follow a DEA agent and this drug lord in Mexico, kind of going up against each other. It's really good so far. I like it a lot. And then finally, I'm reading Dial H, which is this graphic novel. It's written by China Mieville, the science fiction writer, who writes a lot of weird stuff. And man, he's really taking the weird over the top in this. Super weird. It's this guy, like, he finds this phone booth, and when he dials the numbers for Hero, Hero, it's like 437 something. He turns into a superhero, but it's a random superhero every time. He gets like totally random powers. So like, and they're always super weird. Like one of them is like Chimney Boy, the human chimney. And he like this big chimney and like points himself at the bad guys and like shoots smoke at them and stuff. It's super weird. Like every issue is like something really, really weird. And I almost put her down after the first issue because I was like, this is just too weird for me, but it's kind of growing on me, so
Cool.
I'm gonna finish it.
It sounds quirky.
Yeah, it's definitely is. So there you go. That's what I'm reading.
Okay. And I was just looking it up because I couldn't remember the name, but if you're interested in all that sort of the drug dealer and cartel stuff, James Altucher had interviewed, I think like a month or so ago now. I had to look up the name. Is Freeway Rick Ross, and he was like the biggest importer of drugs like in like North America through I think like the 80s, and he just got out of prison like a while ago. But they talk about the business of being like the one of the biggest drug dealers in the world and how he handled the business, and it's pretty cool. And actually, it's nowhere near as violent as you might think it was, which is one of the reasons that he was so successful for so long before he finally got taken down. Anyway, so let's see. My reading for the week, I finished John L. Monk's Hopper House, which is the third book in the Jenkins cycle. The first two books are Kick and Fool's Ride. Loved it. It's hard. It's always hard to talk about the second or third book in a series without giving away stuff that may have happened in the previous books. But so the general idea is, Dan is a guy who hops from head to head, and he's dead, and he hops into people's heads, and typically they're very terrible people. I think we've talked about this before. And he generally tries to figure out what they've done, and because he wants to make sure that they really are a bad person before he, puts them in a situation that when he leaves their body, they're going to be either dead or in prison, or he wants to make sure he doesn't do the wrong thing if they're a good person. And so we're into the third book, and the great thing about this book is the first two followed Dan very closely, and like the first book was sort of three, I think it was three, kind of almost like not short stories, but like one hop, two hop, three hop into three different situations. And then the second book kind of expanded on that a little bit more, and more of an arc throughout. And then in this one, what he's done is he's really opened up the universe and kind of explaining a little bit more of how everything works. And it's really cool. It's very well written. I'm really enjoying this series, and I hope there's going to be more. And I'll mention this again at the end of the show, but John's actually going to be our guest next week. So we're looking forward to that. And I read a short story by Hugh Howey. I was flipping through Kindle Unlimited, and I was like, oh, I'm going to grab, because I know he's been writing a lot of these lately. So I read the Walk Up Nameless Ridge. I don't know if you guys have read any of the short pieces. I didn't actually enjoy this one, and sort of it was a little, I kind of would put it in the literary, wheelhouse. It's more sort of, I think what I'd said in my review is like he's sort of painting a picture rather than really telling a story. It's all about the environment and just sort of one character's thoughts and what he's living through in this sort of one very condensed sort of situation. And it's very well written, but I found myself drifting because I want some dialogue and I want some action, and that's just the kind of reader I am. So I didn't personally enjoy it, but I think it was very well written. Someone who likes sort of more literary fiction and wants to sort of have a picture painted for them would probably enjoy it. And that's my reading for the week.
Cool.
So we'll move on to our topic, and we're going to talk about sequels. So, book 2. I have a list. PT, you have a list? Yeah, I mean, I kind of stuck with book 2 specifically, and yeah, it is tough because what could you say about Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets that you couldn't say about any of the books in the series other than it's a lot shorter. It's definitely longer than the first one, and that's that I think is one of the sequels that I have that works very well. But I think she had almost kind of established the pattern there, right? I suppose if I'm actually, I haven't started reading it yet, but I'm up to book 4, I think. Mm-hmm. Goblet of Fire. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And the one thing I have kind of noticed about the books that works well in the movie, but I found in the books too, and like you can imagine living this adventure that they're on, where it takes place over an entire school year. So there's huge swaths of time where like literally nothing happens. So it's like terrible things happen on the way to school, and then it's 4 months go by, and then something else happens, and then it's Christmas, and then right, so she spreads it out over the entire school year, and it works very well in the movies. It kind of works in the books too, but there are some periods where you think like there's really nothing happening here.
Yeah.
But in general,
more so in books 6 and 7 than the early books, I would say.
yeah, and I don't know that I'm going to make it through the whole series, honestly, and not in one straight run, just because they get so long. Like I already,
yeah.
I've got,
I mean,
I've
yeah.
got
Well, book 7 is Harry Potter Goes Camping. Really, it should be the
I've
subtitle.
seen enough of the movie to know that statement is accurate. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with your assessments of the Harry Potter series. I thought Chamber of Secrets was a really solid book. A lot of people don't talk about it, but it's pretty solid.
I liked it. Yep.
Do you guys like just kind of a general sequel kind of question that made me think of? Do you guys like sequels that are kind of, let's repeat the pattern of the first book again? So kind of the Harry Potter, early Harry Potter, or Back to the Future, like, oh, instead of going back in time, we could go forward in time. Or do you prefer, or do you like the kind of sequels that are like, now we're going to continue the story, maybe not with the same pattern, but maybe like more of an Empire Strikes Back kind of sequel where it's different story, but same characters on a different kind of a story?
I don't think I have a type of sequel that I like as long as it's good.
Yeah.
So I mentioned like with the Dan Jenkins, like the Jenkins cycle there, where, and you don't always know if the author planned to write multiple books in a series all along. Clearly, J.K. Rowling did, right? I mean, I think she had that probably the whole thing plotted out. But for a book, where Kick was, like I said, kind of 3 almost sort of individual hops, and then the second book was more of an overall arc, and then the third book kind of expands on that again. You mentioned Empire Strikes Back, where knowing that was going to be a trilogy, and when you read books that were meant to be that way, the second book is usually quite a lot darker than the first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's sort of the middle. It's the middle act, and for whatever reason, people seem to like that better than the others.
Right.
Maybe because there's more emotional sort of attachment there to the characters. But I do find that there are sequels where maybe the author is trying to catch that lightning in a bottle, from the first book, and maybe it wasn't meant to be a multi-book series, and it just kind of doesn't work. And one of those for me was one that I've recommended several times. The first book, which was Warren Fahy's Fragment.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic book. Loved it, and that's the one that I recommend, Michael, that you had read after Jurassic Park. Because it's the same kind of general idea, but sort of a different path. Really scary and pretty awesome. But the second book in this series, it just didn't do it for me. There was no excitement. It just didn't feel kind of as genuine as the first book. And so it doesn't always work. Have you guys read Dr. Sleep?
Yeah.
No.
I have. Yep.
I haven't read that one.
You have? I was curious. No, I haven't. So I'm curious to know, because I'm someone who hasn't read King in years, but of course I love like The Shining and.
Yeah, that's on my list of ones that I wanted to talk about. I like it a lot. It's an interesting sequel in that it hardly references The Shining at all. Like there's a couple lines that talk about The Shining, but for the most part, it's just here's this character many years later, and that he's greatly affected by what happened in The Shining. But I think it's really well done the way he doesn't harp on, oh, this is just like remember what happened that other time or whatever. The way a lot of sequels always call back to the earlier books, he doesn't at all like make a point of what happened earlier. There's like one line where he's like Danny's father was a scary man, but he's still.
Now does it? So that begs the question for me anyway. Like, do you get the sense from reading it that it could does it need to be a sequel to The Shining? Is there any, like, could it have been a standalone book, and would it have lost anything by not being lost anything other than sales by not being the sequel to The Shining?
Yeah,
Not
no,
that
I
Stephen
think
King would, you know.
yeah, I think it could be, and I think you could read it without reading The Shining.
Okay.
But I feel like get a lot deeper picture of the character by just knowing that stuff that happened to him in the past. That's always kind of like in the subtext, but isn't really called out. So I think it's cool to know what he went through as a kid, even if it's not super important to the story. So yeah, I liked it a
I
lot.
feel like in the sequel, sometimes, you know, that one of the things I was thinking about too is almost like the first book is kind of written with joy, and then the second book is just kind of plugging away at something. You know, and again, an example of this might be The Rosie Project by Graham Simsayan. Loved that book. It's kind of a romantic comedy. It's very self-aware, about an Australian geneticist who is helping, and he's autistic. That's never explicitly stated, I don't think, but clearly he's kind of the Sheldon Cooper type character if you watch Big Bang Theory. And that was definitely a lightning in a bottle for me. Like, it was just a great read, a lot of fun. It was a palate cleanser for me at the time because it's not the kind of thing I would normally read, but it was funny and bright. And then the sequel really tried to hit all the same notes, and I think it missed a lot of them. Still a good book, but nowhere near as enjoyable. And maybe part of the problem is reading them back to back. Maybe if there was a year in between them, you might feel more like you were reconnecting to the original book because you know, maybe it wasn't so fresh in your mind. I don't know.
Yeah. I was going to say sequels that, I mean, obviously not to keep to the negative, but yeah, I would say to your earlier comment, PT, I don't have a preference on the type of sequel or the type of plot, as long as it's not phoned in, right? Like, for example, recently, To Kill a Mockingbird, that sequel. I said it from the beginning, just not terribly interested, you know, and it sounds like the book bomb. It sounds like it's a bomb, you know, and I mean, why wouldn't it be, right? I mean, it was the original draft of To Kill a Mockingbird that the publisher initially rejected and told her to rewrite. Well, why did they reject it, right? So, I don't know. I don't mind it. You know, also don't
But
mind.
sorry, Michael, but you haven't read it though, right?
No, I have not read it.
Okay.
No, I have not read it. I'm not making any judgments on it. It's just one of those things you kind of have to see it coming, right? And like, I always have a problem when it just seems like the author is phoning it in or the publisher is making them write it because it's successful, kind of like big movie studios, right? You know, you have a really good smash hit, right? And then there's a sequel, and then there's another sequel, and then it just gets to the point where, you know, there's a million Spider-Man movies out. You know, I mean, what are you going to do? But I would say a sequel that I really liked just blanked out. Totally, it was right there, just gone.
No
You just gave me, while you're trying to remember, you just gave me a great idea that you're talking about the Spider-Mans and that. I'm surprised it hasn't moved into the world of reading, is where, you know, maybe authors should start rebooting their franchises.
Ooh,
You know,
like
so
nice.
Lee Child should just say, okay, the last 18 books, Jack Reacher, never happened. Let's let's start over.
Just relaunch an emo Jack Reacher. You know?
Yeah, reboot the entire series. Jim Butcher could do it. You know, I don't know how you would make it clear that it was a reboot, but
yeah, that's actually a pretty cool idea. I mean, obviously we're talking about as readers, but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I think we could bring up, although not a sequel, I think it's interesting to think about Armada a little bit, because while not a sequel, it's definitely like a thematic sequel, and I think sequels are interesting in that they kind of show you. I did finish it. Yeah, I liked it more than you, but
if you liked it, you liked it more than me.
Yeah, it was like a 3-star read for me, but yeah, it was interesting in that like a lot of times in the sequel or the second book, you get to see what the author thought was cool or thought was interesting about the first book. And with Armada, like that's a case where what he thought was cool apparently about the first book is different than what a lot of a lot of people thought was cool about it. He kind of just tried to redo the same thing in a way that was a little bit less effective. But one thing I do like about sequels is that I think a lot of times they can be cool because the world's already set up, you know, and the author has a little more room to play with the characters, and I think that it can be good. And I think a lot of times sequels get, you know, you always hear that the sequel's not as good as the original, and a lot of times that's true. But I think they can be cool for a lot of those kind of reasons, that there's just more room to play and more, you know, we already know the characters a little bit, so there's interesting room to go in a few different directions.
Yeah, and
I'll tell you one thing that annoys the hell out of me with sequels is when they're necessary. And by that I just mean, so I don't mean if it's, how to explain this, like, so, you know, the Hunger Games, that was always probably meant to be a 3-book series, right? But each book is a contained story in itself. You could read the first one and be happy with it and never continue. What ticks me off is when you get a book that basically ends on a cliffhanger that you have to read the second book to find out the resolution.
Right.
And I think we talked about this on the show about cliffhangers. That I like to have all, not all, so you don't have to wrap up all the threads, but wrap up enough that the book doesn't end with the antagonist and the protagonist standing on a cliff, and, you know, one of them gets pushed off the cliff, and then the book ends.
Yeah.
You have to, you know, read the second book to find out what happens. That, to me, if that's happened only once that I can think of, like off the top of my head, and I never continued the series. It just you know, upset me too much because it's cheap. It just feels cheap.
Yeah, I guess, you know, as a series reader, I really didn't start reading series until relatively late in life. So within like the last 1 or 2 years. And I guess all the books that I read when I was a kid, I guess maybe it's a perception thing, right? But like when you have book 1 that comes out, I don't know, today, but then the sequel doesn't come out until 10 years from now, you know, it's just, that's hard. That's a hard sell for me, you know. But,
yeah, I imagine George R.R. Martin's fans, I mean, that's probably one of their biggest complaints, right?
Well, at least he's writing them back to back, though. You know, like
not writing different books in between,
right,
and stuff
or not writing at all, right? And then all of a sudden coming back and having a book in
he just says he's writing. He's sitting on a beach. He's just sitting on a beach for 4 years, and then he looks at his calendar and like, oh shit, the deadline's in 2 weeks. I better start writing
this out. Yeah, with his assistant that apparently it does helps him with a lot of the plotting, I guess, from what I've heard. But yeah,
I wouldn't want to see that, you know, flow chart or the, you know, that all the characters. And,
probably take up a whole building.
Yeah.
You know, all the yeah. I guess I would say the Bone series for me as a sequel, just deferring to something I'm familiar with. Good example. See, that's an example of a series where the cliffhangers are done right. You know, like I feel like when I got to the end of Volume 1, I guess that one didn't end on such a cliffhanger. I mean, you kind of wanted to know what was going on in this world, but with Volume 2, there was a pretty big cliffhanger. So
that's also potentially a little hard to lock down too, because those volumes are kind of broken up. I mean, I guess they are sort of contained stories, but of course each volume is whatever 12 issues.
Right, which were originally single issues too. But even the single issues themselves have really great cliffhangers. I mean, they're the kind that you have to know what happens next, but it doesn't feel cheap, like you'd mentioned with some of those other books. But yeah, Bone, and then I guess just mention like superhero comics, right? Like where you've got a self-contained story or a self-contained arc, and then next year a new artist takes over and does something totally different. Like,
and I don't know, do you think books because you're mentioning movies there. I wonder? I'm trying to think of an example, but if books kind of run into the same problem, and what do they call it in the movies? It's like the problem where in Batman 1 you have one villain, the
Right.
Joker, and then in the second movie, because people are expecting more, you've got three villains,
Right.
and so this most recent Batman arc didn't have that problem really, but the earlier ones certainly
They
did
did.
with
Yeah.
Michael Keaton. I mean, by the time you got to
Yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, there were like 8
Yeah,
villains,
there were a
and
ton of them. No, I was referring to the comics and graphic novels with superheroes. Um, I guess what Spider-Man and the Ultimates, X-Men, where you've got like a whole arc, and the arc just ends, and then someone else picks it up. Like a good example would be all the different reboots that they've done. I mean, they're rebooting the movies, obviously, but they do it a lot with comics too.
Mhm.
Like when they redid all the Marvel superheroes back in the early 2000s, when they all became the Ultimates. Did you guys ever read those?
Yeah, I did.
I think I was out
I
by
enjoyed
then.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
I enjoyed those. They were a lot of fun, and like just reimagining. I don't know. I think it's interesting to do that when the core character kind of stays the same. To see them in a modern, updated environment, and I think that would be an interesting thing for a lot of art, like authors to do. I don't know. I'm drawn to sequels. I mean, obviously, I like a continuous story, but I'm also drawn to kind of standalones too. And I think that's why, like for the most part, I used to read just only standalones, just because I just never wanted to be let down with a story. I
Yeah,
was
I
always
do.
afraid.
I will these days. Um, I'm more likely now to wait on a series for it to be finished.
Mhm.
I think it's the same thing people are doing more with television, and which is maybe one of the reasons that Netflix will release an entire season on the same day. You start watching normal kind of network shows today, and you don't know if it's going to make it past 3 or 4 episodes or
Yeah,
just get canceled, or if it's going to get a second season, or I could see same thing with books. You maybe want to see like if it's uh, you know marketed as a series, right? You may not want to buy book 1 in this series because you don't know that you're ever going to see book 2. You might
right.
want to wait for 6 years for all 3 books to be out and then just bang through the whole thing at once. I really like the James S. A. Corey's Expanse books, and that's a series actually that I think at the end of book 3, like book 4 came out, I was like, holy cow, that's awesome. I didn't think that there was going to be a book 4, and then book 5 came out, and it's like, okay, that's they just they so that's kind of a nice surprise when you read something that's so self-contained that finding out that there's going to be a second book is like just kind of a nice surprise.
Yeah,
Cool.
I would say this is not really a sequel territory, but like continuous stories. So like the Arabian Nights, like where you have a character or certain characters that appear in different stories. I think it's an interesting way to look at sequels too. Like where you have, oh gosh, what is it? The is it Stephanie Ivanovich who writes where she's got
It's the
you, you know what I'm
Plum.
talking.
Yeah,
Yes, well, it's not Stephanie Plum. It's another series I think that she does where
I
it's
was trying to
like a
think.
spinoff.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the main authors or a lot of the big huge authors are kind of doing that. You know, I think that's interesting too. Uh, oh,
Like to take sort of a secondary character
to
from
take
a
a
book
sec,
and
yeah, to
spin
take a
them off into
secondary
their own.
character and
Yeah.
make them their own series. I think when done well, that's pretty cool. When done wrong, not
I
very
haven't
cool.
read them in years, but probably a good example that I could think of that would probably be the Star Wars universe, where
Yeah,
the novelizations of that. I mean, that's all secondary characters, and not
right.
all, but
Star
spun
Trek and
off into their
Stargate do that
own.
too. Yeah,
Yep.
their own separate universes.
Cool.
Cool.
We mentioned
Anything else?
we mentioned most of mine. I'll just shout out a couple others on my list. So we said Doctor Sleep. I was going to mention The Magician's Land by Lev Grossman. I think is a really good sequel. Better than the original. I had Fool's Ride down, which we talked about. I had the Harry Potter series, which we talked about. Um, Contagious by Scott Sigler.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Infected series. I like that.
I love that series, but I'll tell you, this kind of speaks maybe to what Michael was saying too. Is like there was such a ridiculous amount of time between books 2 and 3,
Right.
and I couldn't remember what happened in in the second book, and I was really worried about that because I was like, how am I going to get back into this story? But kudos to Scott Sigler because he wrote at the beginning of that book, like a 2-page, not even like a synopsis, like here's what happened, but just like kind of an introduction into the new book that reminded you of what had happened. Like he just did a fantastic job of summing it all up.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't read the third book yet. I got to get on that.
I have one that I forgot to mention. Unicorn Western. We talked about it before.
Oh yeah.
The show by Shawnee featuring
Shawnee, John, and Dave.
Shawnee, John, and Dave. Yeah, good series. That was it was a lot of books, but it was a lot of fun. I thought, just the characters and just the action and good stuff.
And
Go ahead, PT. Do you have anything else on your list?
Well, you won't like this, Michael, but the only one I was thinking if I could do like just one example of a kind of disappointing sequel, and I had Lost World as my disappointing sequel.
No, I'm gonna buy it tonight. Oh, don't do this to me.
But it was a long time ago I read it, so who knows? Maybe.
No,
Maybe it's awesome.
That's cool. I still plan on reading it. I've heard that from other people too, that it was, not what Jurassic Park was, but well, to be expected, right? And you can't always knock it out of the park.
Right.
So, maybe to kind of wrap up, I was thinking we could each pick the one book that's a standalone that you would love to have a sequel, assuming it was good. A sequel that wouldn't ruin the original for you, because the reason I thought of this was because, as usual, I've been looking at PT's bookshelf while he's talking and looking at his books, and of course I saw something on his shelf. I was like, that needs a sequel. It'll never get one, but and I'm sure one of you guys will guess what it is.
American Gods.
No, but you're close.
That was on my list. That was the one I would mention. If it was good. Now, if it sucks, then I don't want to read it. But if it's good, which he said he's going to do one, so it's close to American Gods. Like close in vicinity or close?
No, not in physicality on the shelf.
Oh, okay.
Thinking authors. Good Omens.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Okay, yeah.
If there could be a follow-up to that book, that would have been amazing. But and that's something people talked about for years. And of course, Terry Pratchett passed away. But talk about lightning in a bottle, right? That was just an unbelievably fun, fantastic book. And that's the other thing about sequels too, is they can be scary, right? To hear that like Kill a Mockingbird, right? Like. Yeah. You hear a sequel's coming out, and you start, especially after we all got burned with Star Wars, you hear like, oh, they're adding on to my favorite thing, and you start to worry that they might ruin it.
Yeah, true. What would you?
I think after talking about Dr. Sleep, I think I'm going to go Stephen King and say The Stand, because The Stand isn't long enough. We need more. No, but I would like to see. Them like rebuilding the world and what happens after the events of that, maybe 30 years later or something.
Interesting.
Yeah, American Gods for me. I loved American Gods. I mean, I don't know how I guess I don't know how you could make a sequel to that, but maybe it's in the same world. I mean, I guess there's a Nancy Boys, but
the exercise there as authors is maybe to write those sequels ourselves.
Yeah.
Call it fan fiction, and then everybody will hate you for doing it. But
and pray that
you might become the next Stephanie Meyer or whoever else started out writing fan fiction,
or the next convict if they sue you for copyright infringement.
Sure. Okay. So any last minute thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, that's all I got.
Okay. Well, PT, as usual, It's becoming a habit. Thanks for filling in for an absent host, or
Sure.
and just coming on the show in general. It's always great talking to you. And next week we are going to have John L. Monk on, and we're looking forward to that. And in the meantime, be sure to go to iTunes and rate and review, and have a great week. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Take care, everyone.
Night,
Bye.
guys.